Today on Technado, we have two interviews, one with an engineer from Google's Flutter team, as well as someone with ThreatQuotient. We're also going to talk about 768K Day, as well as why someone has about 2,000 printer boxes in their front yard. That's all coming up on Technado, starting right now. Hello and welcome to Technado. I'm your host, Peter Van Rysdam, and I'm joined, as always, by our IT expert, Don Pizzette, and our king of all things dev, Justin Dennison. How are you gentlemen doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. I didn't know I was royalty, but I'll take it.
Yeah, you've earned it.
I'm doing well, though.
It's a dynasty. Well. Don's position is not inherited. It's earned.
Yours is all bloodline. I had to work for it.
Well, I got real pale skin from my bloodline, so I think you won out.
Yeah, and your blood doesn't clot.
This is true. This is true. I have a high tolerance to painkillers, though, and so do you.
Yeah, I had surgery one time, and they put on the report, because I got the transcript back, and it said, patient bled like a redhead. and I asked the doctor afterwards on the follow-up, I was like, oh, wait, what's that all about? And he's like, first of all, I'm sorry. I didn't know that they put that in the report where they transcribe all the things I say into the mic, and it means people with paler skin, they bleed a lot.
Yep, they do.
Well, good for me.
Good to know.
Good to know. So if anyone has extra blood, please pass it along. All right, we've got a great show today because we actually have two interviews. We have an interview with Matt Carroll, who's a senior software engineer at Google for the Flutter team, and we also then have an interview from ThreatQuotient with John Cooch, who is a senior vice president of strategy there. So I got two cool things coming up. We also are going to be playing Buzzword Bingo for the first time this week. And if you haven't gotten your Buzzword Bingo card yet, there's still time. Hit pause. Well, hold on. Let me tell you where to go first, then hit pause. You're going to want to head over to go.itpro.tv/buzzword-bingo, and you'll get a card that looks like this, and it'll be blank, and you'll get to pick the words from the bottom, put them in here any which way you want. And then as we say these things during the show, as we get the other people to say the things, we'll be marking them off. You get credit for any of us saying those things. We're not going to play it today during the interviews because one of the interviews we filmed earlier, and we didn't really tell them. We don't want to be,
don't
making
spring it
fun
on
of
at the last minute.
Somehow this turns into like a mystery science
Why do they
theater.
keep giggling?
Yeah, but yeah, got it. Woo. So that's why we might be trying to get each other to say things today that are a little weird.
And we should use different words for the different squares, right?
Yes, you can't just put.
Okay. I was going all or nothing on AI.
I'm going all in on virtual reality because we have a lot of virtual reality stories today. Actually, we don't. All right, so hit pause, head over there, get your card ready, and then let's play some bingo, boys. All right. Well, let's get started today with our first story. This one is from ZDNet. Some internet outages predicted for the coming month as 768K Day approaches. So, yeah, this was. There was the 512K Day a while back, and explain in layman's terms, please, what causes this?
All right, so the basic nature here, anytime you hear somebody refer to a day by some kind of number like this, then you know you've got a problem, right? Like the Y2K, year 2000, you have the 2038 bug or something like that, when the Unix clock, the year rolls over. There's all sorts of weird bugs in computer systems based on a certain number. And this is yet another one of those. So if you're using the internet right now, you're passing through routers. Those routers are using a protocol called BGP, or the Border Gateway Protocol, to find all the various networks that are out there. So every public network on the internet has to have a route that's stored in the BGP table. Now, that BGP table is big. It's been growing. It has hundreds of thousands of routes in it. Well, most of the BGP routers that were deployed around the turn of the century, which sounds funny to say that, but around the turn of the century, all had about 512K of memory assigned to be able to store that table, which seemed like a lot at the time. Well, we have passed that. Actually, back in 2014, we passed that. And a number of routers crashed because they couldn't maintain the full BGP table anymore. They locked up, and there were numerous outages back in 2014. Well, at the time, the advisory that went out told everybody to reconfigure the routers to allow up to 768K of memory, right? Effectively increasing it by 50%. And that seemed like a good idea, I suppose, back then. But now we're approaching 768K. Now, The interesting thing here is nobody knows when the routing table is actually going to hit 768K. In fact, by my tally, we've already hit it, right? But a number of sites out there are reporting that we haven't quite hit it, so it's any day now that we're actually going to hit 768K routes. In fact, here, let me pull this up. There's a couple of different websites you can go to learn about the BGP table. Potaroo is one, but I've got another one here, ciderreport.org. And what they do is they always post updated information here based on the current classless intradomain routing routes that are a part of the BGP table. And what you can see in here is that as of April 25th, 2019, there are currently 774,152 prefixes. And, oh gosh, that is really small. There we go. 774,152 prefixes inside of the BGP table. Each route can occupy as much as a kilobyte or it's a kilobyte of storage, but not quite. And so that's why there's a little bit more room. And so it looks like we've already crossed 768K, but you actually have a little more space beyond that. So any router that hasn't been updated to reflect more storage is effectively going to lock up or have outages. So this is coming.
So are they doing a better job of future-proofing this for the next time now? Are they recommending you change your routers to, say, 775K?
You know,
I feel like we should go a little bit further.
It's like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner.
Yeah.
Apparently, you just keep plotting that just a little bit more will
like,
get us through.
well, we'll never hit 800K.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Well, the sad part here, you can't even make the argument of, well, hardware is expensive. We want to set a reasonable limit. Memory is not expensive today.
Go
you know,
nuts.
You go to a gig. Hell, it's it's easy enough. Now, the larger that routing table is, the harder it becomes to manage. So you don't want it to get too big, but they could go beyond. And the newer advisory has actually gone a step further, or a step less, and not specified a maximum size. So it's the Wild West out there. But I'll tell you, this is not something to worry about. Regular companies don't have to deal with this. Even if your company uses BGP, the odds are you're pulling down a subset of the table and not the full table. This is a problem ISPs have to deal with. And I fully do expect to see some of the ISPs have outages, but it'll be a pretty rare thing as long as you're in an area where your ISP is actually profitable.
So this has nothing to do with something, what do they call it when a new threat comes out?
Zero day?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
0 day.
Check. Mark that
Circle
down.
gets the square.
Glad to
You got that?
contribute to our bingo
All right.
efforts.
Thank you. I knew that was a stupid question, by the way. I knew that had nothing to do with that, but it had the word day in it, and I thought I could get down to say that. So I'm well on my way to bingo because I got the Technado in the center there. It's the free square. So, all right, let's move on now to our next story. This one over at WindowsLatest.com. Windows 7 users are now receiving the end of support reminder notifications. So, Windows 7 still on a lot of machines out there, right?
Absolutely.
Especially in government and companies that don't care.
I thought you were going to
say that.
And government.
Yeah, and other government.
And other government.
Yeah.
So not just government, but a lot of education, any place that has a large deployment of machines. It's a pain to deploy an all-new operating system. So many places are still running Windows 7. Hell, many places are still running Vista and Windows XP, even though those are well beyond support. So Windows 7, Microsoft is now taking the extra step of actually displaying an announcement. And we've got kind of a screenshot here of what it looks like, where basically they're saying, look, it's time to upgrade, time to move to that next version. Or actually, this is the free up. This is not the alert that you're actually seeing. But anyhow, so an alert
They're
does come
giving
up.
Windows 7 as an option on that.
Yeah, that's not. Here we go. This is it. After 10 years, support for Windows 7 is nearing an end. Now, it has not actually ended yet, but it is going to be ending soon, and you're supposed to move off of Windows 7. Now, for governments and people who don't care, obviously, they aren't totally ending support. What's going to happen is they're going to switch that paid support model where you have to pay to receive security updates, which most governments and large enterprises will gladly do to make sure they don't have to do a huge rollout on a rushed schedule. But this is kind of that final nail in the coffin. If your company or organization is still using Windows 7, it's well past time to move on.
This is one of those things where every time I read these articles, I guess it's just where we're in the industry. I go, really? But then I think back to government contractor days, and they're like, hey, can you get this to work on IE6 on Windows? I'm like, I didn't even know they made a Windows 2. But yeah, I'm being hyperbolic.
Yeah.
So it seems odd to me, though, that this would seem rushed to them. I mean, they knew it was coming. This is like a year in advance.
Yeah, we've known this for
but,
a while.
But is it like, why is that still rushed?
Well, there's a lot of Microsoft does a really good job with doing their early release versions where you can kind of preview their Windows Insider track, and you still hear about companies where their video card driver doesn't work under the newest Windows update, and they should have known that for months thanks to the Insider track, and companies just don't test. Well, even aside from that, if you're government or private sector, a large enterprise, you might have had a custom-built application written that was completely designed for Windows 7, and now if you want to run Windows 10, you either have to pay a ton of money to upgrade that software or have to start experimenting around with the compatibility options in Windows 10. A lot of companies don't want to do that, so they stick with whatever operating system they can for as long as they can.
Yeah, and to your point, I read something on the Reddit sysadmin subreddit today that LSU, Louisiana State University's, their mainframe is a 43-year-old IBM mainframe that's running COBOL. So Windows 7 doesn't seem that bad in that view. 43 years old, and it runs like their
That's older than
payroll,
me.
student services, tuition, all those kinds of things. So nice critical functions.
Not really important stuff.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
they'll be fine if that goes.
Yeah.
If you can't hold it together with chicken wire and duct tape, you'll be fine.
All right, so if you're still in Windows 7, talk to your boss or elect a new mayor or whatever you need to do to get this to change. But sticking with Microsoft, we're going to head now over to howtogeek.com. Windows 10's Sets app tabs are no more. So I haven't been a Windows user for a while with the MacBooks
Sure.
here. So what are the Sets app tabs?
All right, so I mentioned the Windows Insider track earlier. If you want to preview new stuff that's coming from Microsoft, you install the Insider Edition, and you get to see some really cool things. Well, last year, they rolled out a feature called Windows Sets, and it was really, really cool. If you run a web browser, any web browser, Firefox, Internet Explorer, God forbid, Edge, Chrome, whatever, you have tabs, right? And if you're like me, you probably have 20 tabs open at any given time with all the different sites that you go to. Imagine if you could do that with all your apps, right? Instead of having to rely on a taskbar at the bottom with various buttons, you could group together apps that you were using commonly together. So, for example, here on the How to Geek page, they show Windows File Explorer, Google Chrome, and Notepad all together in a single window. They've created a set, right? And you can have multiple sets for different things. So depending on what your workflow is, you could group these applications together. Now you have a simple tab interface to move between them. It was really cool, right? The problem is not every application behaves nicely when it's put into a tab. And so Microsoft thought they could work that out. And I think what they found was that compatibility was so rough, that so many applications weren't behaving nicely, that ultimately they just decided the feature was not going to happen. The feature disappeared in the most recent Insider builds, and Microsoft just came out a couple of days ago and said, we're sorry, everybody, but the Sets feature is no more. It will not be in Windows. So this one is not coming in the future.
So even the things that it worked for, they're not going to keep it in for them. It's just all
No,
or
it's just
nothing.
out. Yeah, because it's going to be a support call for them. If you support some apps and not others, it just becomes a usability issue. So they just killed the feature off entirely, which stinks because it was a really neat one. I was excited to see it.
Yeah, if you read the article, like even like terminal-based or just like text-based environments, they were like, oh, these tabs work. But then maybe I misunderstood. They were like, oh, yeah, you can actually open up Edge from within those. So they were like trying to, it almost seemed like they were
tabs
trying to
within
do
tabs?
way too much. And it got iffy. And then with the recent change to Chromium, and then they were like, oh, we got to change this again. So I agree with Don. It's just going to be just a quagmire of support and sadness.
Yeah, more trouble than it's worth. That makes sense. All right, well, we've got what?
Just the way you said that.
Your lack of enthusiasm on the topic.
I'm a Mac guy. I don't care. Oh, you won't get that feature. Too bad.
Wah.
Do you have 3-finger swipe? I do. All right, we're gonna keep talking about Microsoft here because I guess they're having a better week than they did last week. But this one over on betanews.com, Microsoft will block the Windows 10 May 2019 update if you have a USB drive or an SD card connected. So why? Is this a security thing?
No, this one, I mean, they had a very visible mess up with the September update, right? So, that whole, the 1809 update was released and then suspended and then released again and then suspended again and then released again. And now it's unofficially suspended. They haven't come out and said that, but it's not rolling out to new machines anymore. And now March has come and gone. And so the 1903 update is out. And Microsoft, because of the heat they've taken with their previous releases, is taking the better safe than sorry approach and saying, look, if your computer has a USB key plugged into it, right, or an SD card plugged into it, the update will not install. And there's a few reasons for that, but one of the main reasons is during the update, it has to reboot. And if you have to reboot, there's a few things that can happen that can throw off the update. So one, you might actually boot from that USB key or SD card, and now the machine doesn't come back on its own. One of the things Microsoft has been striving to do is make sure these updates happen seamlessly so the users don't have to deal with it. You just come to your computer in the morning and it's been updated. Well, if it's booted to an SD card or something, that's not going to happen. The other thing is drive letters can change. So once the update applies and you reboot, a drive that used to be your D drive might become your E drive and so on. And now you start ending up in problems. These are problems you don't have under operating systems like Linux, where they use UUIDs to mount partitions to folders. But Microsoft doesn't do that, and instead they use device IDs, which in the USB world are not necessarily reliable. So that's where they basically said, we're just not going to roll out to anything with an SD card present or a USB drive. Now, for people like me, where I always have a USB drive attached to my computer because I back up to the darn thing, that means the update will never apply, which is nice. And, I'll get to manually install it at some point.
Well, even the warning message doesn't look like it tells you exactly why. So to the common user that maybe has a drive for backup installed or something like that, they would see this and it's not specifically telling you, hey, it's because you've got this drive installed. It's saying there's
it actually
hardware
says
that isn't
no
ready.
action is needed.
Yeah,
no action needed. We'll come back to this later. Is effectively what it says.
So the word for word is this PC can't be upgraded to Windows 10. Your PC hardware. Your PC has hardware that isn't ready for this version of Windows 10.
If
So
I read that, I'd assume it's something inside. I've got, I installed RAM that I shouldn't have. And
got to upgrade a video card.
Yeah.
But it's not ready. You just need to unplug it.
Well, and they have the button there that says, why am I seeing this? So maybe on there they'll have a little more explanation of it could be because of this, could be because of that. Yeah, maybe. Who knows? But I don't feel like the messaging there is that great, and you'll have a lot of people that don't have the latest update as a result.
Yeah. It does go on to say, though, that this just applies to the 18877 or 18877 build of Windows 10, and that a future build should resolve this. So at some point, a new build of this update will come out, which will allow this installation. But it does create the little sticky problem of we're supposed to have these nice big updates twice a year, and now there's going to be more than one version of this update thanks to this rollout. So it's kind of another black eye from Microsoft. They're really having a hard time with these big 6-month rollups.
Again, doesn't affect me. So,
because your Mojave upgrade went great, right?
Okay, I have not. I don't even know what I'm on now, but I know I'm not on the latest thing because of my docking station still. So I'm fine. Things are working. No dark mode, but I'm alive.
You're not missing much.
Yeah, but the screen's dark. All right, now let's head over to tomshardware.com. 8-core CPUs come to laptops with Intel's 9th Gen H series processor. So these aren't the amazing processors we were talking about a few weeks ago with Wes that are going to change all of our lives.
They sort of are.
They are.
Yeah.
Is that like the $2,500 one, or
not
or the
that
$8,000
one,
one,
no. Yeah,
whatever
not
the
that
crazy.
One. Same family though, right?
Okay.
So the one Wes was talking about was the i9 9900X, which is like a 28 core CPU or something crazy like that. Yeah. This one is talking about some i9s though. If you run to the store right now to buy a laptop, the odds are you'll see some i3s, i5s, and maybe even one or two i7s. But up until recently, you have not seen i9s in laptops. Well, MSI and a couple of other hardware vendors have come out this week announcing new models of their laptops. Lenovo also announcing that they will now have i9 processors available in some of their laptops that are coming up soon, which is really cool because i9s are just super awesome, right? They're really, really powerful. They are mostly 8-core, the variation that we see here, which makes them a little bit more affordable than their 28-core cousins. However, I'm really curious to see how this goes because while they are fairly battery efficient the way that they're designed, they run really, really hot. And I know just even having an i7 in a laptop, you can count on hearing those fans ramp up. An i9, I mean, that's got to be like a wind tunnel of a laptop. I can't imagine that's going to be a good mix for your average user.
Yeah, does that count as like a quantum computer then that I have if I've got that? Or how do you define that?
Yeah, I don't think it counts.
You're not going to say quantum computer?
Because it's on your bingo card.
I was looking at...
But even if he did say it, you can't get points for it because you said it.
No, but if he says it, then
Yeah, but you already said it. I can't bait you.
You totally can bait
No,
me. I looked at your thing and it didn't say quantum, so I said I'm going to try to get Don to say quantum.
So if I went, what are those things that are going to take over the world? They were in Terminator and what are they called?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not going to answer. But if I did, if I said robots, you'd get it then. But if you said say robots, if I tell the guy standing up front say B5 and he says B5. I can mark B5 on my bingo card.
Is this going to turn into Calvin Ball where the rules are like continually changing?
We'll need an official judge's ruling on
bring
this
in a scorekeeper.
If your right
what is
hand,
it, Judge Joe Mill-Lanes or whatever his name
yeah,
is?
we can get him.
I'll allow it.
What's Wapner up to? It's
still
retired,
alive?
right? Yeah, I gotta hope so.
a
the
horrible
original.
tangent.
It's the original.
all right. Well, back on track.
Yeah, we're gonna stay on Tom's Hardware. But, do you have more on this one?
There are still i3s, i5s, and so on. But the big announcements this week actually did not include any i3s. So if you look, I've got the little chart pulled up here with what's being released, and you'll see i5s, i7s, and i9s. The i9s come in two models, the H and the HK. Remember that normally when we see like HK, it's telling us that is a unlocked CPU, which means you can overclock it. Also another bad idea in a laptop. But these are kind of a new category where Intel is calling them partially unlocked. I don't actually know what that means, but it means that there's going to be some kind of limitation. I imagine we'll learn more closer to these releasing.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the partial unlock, like a little bit further down, it's like a single sentence or something like that.
That's all we get.
Yeah, it's you can like overclock a core, or no, you can't go more than 400 megahertz above the overclock, the standard overclocks, or the standard like boost speed or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, personally, I don't overclock. Do you do a lot of overclock?
No, not anymore. No.
Yeah, I remember that was all the rage when people were like dipping them in like liquid nitrogen and stuff, and they were like, "Look, we got 7 gigahertz. I mean, it died, but we got it."
When you could take a 200 megahertz processor and overclock it to 300, right? That's a 50% gain. That's a big deal. But when you take a 4.6 gigahertz processor and overclock it to 5 gigahertz, that's not that big of a gain. And honestly, you're just shortening the life of your hardware. So I don't bother with it, but I know there's a huge community out there of people that do it. The big thing, if you keep reading that sentence, they go on to say, so with the right cooling, it too may be able to reach 5 gigahertz. Well, you can't change the cooling in a laptop. So this is going to be up to the vendors, and I seriously doubt the vendors are going to overclock this. So while it does list that, I doubt we're going to see it.
Also says it's 54% quicker in Adobe Premiere editing, so I'd like to go ahead and put in a request for one of these.
Well, if Apple follows their current trend, they will roll out these processors in their laptops in 5 to 6 years.
Yep.
And they'll still be at full retail.
Fantastic. All right, looking forward to it. All right, on Tom's Hardware again, we have another article. Alum kills over $58,000 in PC gear with a USB killer device. So what does he go to the computer lab and just a disgruntled former student decided to wreak some havoc?
Yeah, he was a graduate. He had gotten his degree and was no longer employed by the university, and then he took a USB killer. Which are you guys familiar with those?
Yeah, I read a little bit about it in the article. It like overpowers the capacitors within the circuit, and things just go horribly awry.
So it's a creative idea. Basically, even on a secured machine, a USB port will typically charge devices that are plugged into it. So the USB killer, it looks like a thumb drive, but it has a bunch of capacitors in it. And so it plugs in and just starts charging up the capacitors over and over and over until it finally reaches full load, and then it sends that charge right back into the computer, a lot of times frying the motherboard. The person who invented it did it as a call to action saying, look, USB needs to do some kind of authentication when you plug in a device. Now, that hasn't happened as a whole. So these devices are real. You can buy them, and they just wreak havoc. So this guy went around zapping device after device after device. Now, these things aren't necessarily quick. They take 5 to 10 minutes to actually do their deed. So he had to have a lot of time to be able to go in and do this.
Yeah, so I was originally thinking, oh, this is a worm or something he put in and it killed all these computers. But that means he sat down at
physical
66 computers it says down later in the article.
And filmed himself doing it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And making statements such as, I'm going to kill this guy, and then putting it in and filming it. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, this is horrible, but you definitely don't film yourself doing that, right? I need some kind of deniability.
Yeah, I think that's part of our like YouTube generation that we have now. People film themselves doing dumb things, and this probably would have happened 20 years ago if we had the technology to do it. Now we're just enabling people to make bad choices.
Yep. Well, the Department of Justice says he faces up to 10 years in prison and a fine of up to $250,000. So a lot more than just the 58 grand of stuff he destroyed there. So.
And I think he actually, in the article, it said that he had agreed to also pay back the $58,000 to the university.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah.
I wonder if they'll name the computer lab after him.
Yeah, but if he goes to jail for 10 years, when are they going to get their $58K?
Yeah. Normally, if you donate that much money to the school, they name something.
Yeah. Well, if he's in prison, he'll probably be earning what, like $1 a day.
Yeah.
And
58,000 a day. Yeah, it's going to be a while. It's going to be a long time.
all right.
All right, let's head over to Ars Technica now. A mystery agent is doxing Iran's hackers and dumping their code. Iran seems to be getting its own taste of a shadow broker-style leak of secrets. So, we've got kind of vigilante justice going on here.
Yeah, almost 2 years ago, we had this happen here in the U.S. The shadow brokers managed to obtain copies of numerous utilities that the NSA was using and release those out to the public. And now we're starting to see the same kind of thing happening again, but instead of the U.S. government, it's the Iranian government. Now, we know several countries, the U.S., China, U.K., Russia, North Korea, are all very all very active in the cybercrime. I'm ticking off buzzwords, aren't I?
Go on.
Are very, very active in the 0 day and exploit. Oh, I already said 0 day, so good.
Yeah,
Wait a
got
minute.
that already.
Oh, no. I
You got
don't
that
have
already. You got 0 day.
Oh, yeah, I do. I
Nice.
do. All right. Cool.
So anyhow, they're very active in it, and in this case, we're seeing the Iranian tools, and not just the tools being released, but also we're seeing the identities of who these hackers are, which, while they're not going to go to court or anything like that anytime soon because they're state-sanctioned, it does make it a little harder for them to operate now that their identities are known, and it does put them at personal risk depending on whether somebody wants to take action in a unofficial manner, as we've seen in numerous Tom Cruise movies. So that's certainly possible.
The Syndicate.
Tom Cruise did not get back to us for comment on this article. But anyhow, keep an eye out over the next few weeks, because when this happened with the NSA tools, we then started to see a huge uptick in exploits, actual malware worms and things that were spreading across the internet that took advantage of these vulnerabilities. We'll likely see the same thing with the Iranian tools. Any new exploits that they found will start to get used in very public exploits over the next few weeks.
Were the NSA tools, those are the ones, one of those led to WannaCry, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So we need to be on the lookout for whatever the names are, because that could be bad, but we should be diligent in new things that are going to occur.
It was Eternal Blue was the exploit from that Vault 9 release or whatever that was. I think I got that name wrong there. But anyhow, so that was what led to the worm WannaCry had that, it would leverage that exploit to be able to get its foothold into machines. And I don't think we have an article for it this week, but one of the hackers that was involved in like breaking the WannaCry case and figuring it out and blocking it, he just got arrested because he had written some malware himself in his earlier career. So
like you're saying this was like originally NSA stuff that they
So it was based off an exploit that came from like exposing those tools, Eternal Blue and Eternal Romance, because it was WannaCry and I don't know how to say it, not Petya or whatever, or not, but he stopped it because he found a way to like stop the WannaCry. But I read that article this week as well where he was like, I did some bad things too. So.
I'm not all good.
Yeah,
I use my powers for evil.
he has done a lot of good though since then.
He has.
But now he'll have to do that from behind bars.
He'll throw himself at the mercy of the court and see if he gets credit for all the good things that he did along the way.
Doubtful.
All right, let's take a look now at TechCrunch.com. A hotspot finder app exposed 2 million Wi-Fi network passwords. And I was reading this article a little bit and trying to understand why did it have all these passwords? And it looks like people put the passwords in themselves to use this service. And
Yeah, originally I wasn't going to report on this article because I figured, hey, an app has a vulnerability, big deal. We hear about that every other day. But this one was interesting because it could be affecting you without you even running the app, right? So let's say, for example, that you have guests come over. They visit your home and you give them
wish.
your Wi-Fi key, right?
Never happened.
No, nobody visits you. So anyhow, you share your key with them so they can get on the wireless and whatever. Well, if they were making use of this app, and they decided, hey, I'm going to log that in there. That way, if I ever come back or, whatever, I've got access to that key again. Well, the app was storing all of these Wi-Fi passwords, and it was storing them unencrypted in a way that was easy to gain access to. Over the life of the app, it had acquired over 2 million different Wi-Fi network passwords, all stored there in plain text. So anybody who downloaded and installed the app was easily able to dive into that and access that database and dump all of those passwords. So while you may have never run the app, if you shared your Wi-Fi password with somebody else who did use the app, they could have entered it in. Your password could be in there. So if you have any static private keys used in your wireless network, now is a good time to change them.
What was really scary about this, to me, precise geolocation as well. So they would take a snapshot of your geolocation, and for some reason I go, people reuse passwords, even Wi-Fi passwords, and now I know where this password came from. And if it's a residence, right, then guess what? Oh, well, let me see if I could just find out their email and try these passwords. So, and unfortunately, they spent 2 weeks trying to contact the developer to take it down, to no avail. And eventually, the server was hosted on DigitalOcean, and they took it down and informed the developer. So that was good.
All right, so question on how this app was actually intended to work before there was this leak. If I invited you over to my house, I gave you my Wi-Fi password, you put it into the app, is it then sharing it with, if Justin is driving by and is looking for Wi-Fi, it would share that with him to make it public, basically?
It actually gave you the option to do that, yeah.
Okay.
You could share with other people, or you could just kind of keep it in your own little vault.
I see.
It almost strikes me as like a Waze or a Gas Buddy or something like that, where you like self-report, and then, oh, well, yeah, I'm going to make it public. So now I can jump on your Wi-Fi, even though Don was the one that put it in there.
And, people would probably think twice about sharing your home password, right? But they wouldn't think twice about a school's password, right? Or, the guest network at any number of organizations. They would share that pretty easily. So this definitely hits those companies. Anybody who has that kind of, like conference spaces where they'll post the password in the building, but they don't necessarily want it shared outside. That's certainly not security.
Restaurants where it's on the chalkboard on the inside as opposed to, okay.
So this would certainly compromise them.
Interesting. All right. So, yeah, I guess even if you didn't use that app, you should, go or just change your password at home periodically?
You should be, if you're using static wireless passwords, you should be routinely cycling them, right? I know most people don't, because if you have a lot of devices like Roku's and Apple TVs and stuff, it's kind of a pain to go and change the password everywhere.
I've got that IP camera.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't want to have to change that.
Don't even want to update it.
No.
So, it is painful, but if you're using static keys, that's what you need to do. Obviously, the better solution would be to switch to doing like WPA Enterprise, where you're using certificates for authentication. Then this wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, or to no longer share your Wi-Fi password with your friends.
Or just get rid of your friends.
Or, like me, don't invite anyone over.
Yeah.
Or,
I like where your
invite
head's
them.
at.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
They just don't.
I just don't invite people.
Yeah. All right, let's head over now to VentureBeat.com. Mozilla details Pyodide, which brings Python to browsers. And Justin, I saw this article and I was like, Justin's going to be able to explain this to me. I don't even have to read it.
I'm going to try my best. So I've been watching Mozilla develop Rust, working on WASM, WebAssembly, which has kind of started to come into browsers. And then another project called Iodide, which the goal was to be able to have a browser target for a variety of languages, Python being the one. Python's a very popular language, but one of those subsets was data science and kind of data engineering. The problem with a lot of those are they're written in Fortran C extensions, and then there's just Python wrappers around them. Now, there's some other projects such as Sculpt, Transcript, Brython, I think, that allow you to run Python, but you could only use the standard Python set. Those C extensions didn't work. NumPy, SciPy, scikit-learn, any of those were off the table. However, Pyodide, using a tool called Inscriptum, which is a C to C++ to WebAssembly compiler that actually uses an Apple product. Crazy stuff, LLVM. I don't think it's an Apple product anymore. So what they do is they take that and they'll change it to WebAssembly, and then that way all of those libraries, existing libraries, still work. There are some downsides though. Like there's a couple of visualizations. You can go to an accompanying blog post for Mozilla, and they show you some cool visualizations, showing you like a population density chart of, I forget what state it was or what county it was, but like the runtime is 50 megabytes. Like it's a 50 megabyte download just to get things running. However, it does open the door to where I don't have to install Python to get started, maybe analyzing data, visualizing data, but also just in general Python. There's still some work to be done, but it's pretty exciting because now we've brought Python to the web. It also opens the case for, I don't have to write JavaScript anymore. I don't have to write JavaScript to make the buttons click. I just need to know one language. So pretty exciting for me, but maybe not everybody, but based on the popularity of Python, I suspect a lot of people are excited.
So this sounds to me kind of like Electron, where you get this one platform, you can develop an app and it runs everywhere. Here you got Python, you can run it anywhere. Are we going to start seeing like total flame wars all over Reddit about how this is a terrible thing?
I think that's already happening. I think that's like a preemptive thing. People are like, I'm just going to go ahead and start this flame thread just in case this happens. There's a little bit of contention. Personally, I think Electron is an interesting project. The one problem I have with it, I run some apps that use Electron, like Visual Studio Code. Every once in a while, you'll get something that has a memory leak, and all of a sudden you're like, why is my text editor using 7 gigabytes of RAM? I close it, I open it back up, and it's using 1 gigabyte of RAM because underneath that's using Chrome. I think this takes a little bit different approach. I want to bring Python to the browser to either do web development, or in this case with Pyodide, and there's an accompanying project called Iodide, I can now take the Python ecosystem and make it accessible from within a browser. Even some of the things like what was interesting is they simulate a file system using browser cache. That could be bad if you have sensitive data that's going there. But it's pretty interesting because when you close that tab, all of those files disappear. That way they're offering Python's capabilities, but I don't have to spend a lot of time telling Peter how to install Python, NumPy, SciPy, Pandas, just to say, hey, look, there's a pretty graph there. And he goes, yeah, that's nice. But you do have a 50 megabyte download. The goal is to make that really cacheable. That way, the initial download is the only time you hit the runtime. And then after that, it's cached, so you only get the small amounts of code that you need to run.
I feel like you made up some of those words.
Yeah. Brython. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah.
Brothon.
PyPy.js, all those fun stuff. Yeah.
So would you say that this is a paradigm shift?
You did, so that's great.
But
for
would
me.
you? Would you please say it?
No.
Okay, I appreciate that.
But I will tell you, some of there are a couple of technologies that are real, like scikit-learn. You may know something about them. It's where computers do thinking, and they're almost. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, when they're intelligent artificially.
Yeah, I think that counts.
I don't
I'm
think
going to
that
count
counts.
it. I'm going to count it.
That's not fair.
Yeah, but actually, machine learning does become capable
Machine learning.
within the browser with some of these tools. So.
Did I not use machine learning?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a
You
mistake.
did not.
Oh, man. Did you get that though, Don? Machine learning.
I've been doing a terrible job
I know.
ticking off my little card here.
I said hacking earlier. That's on your top row.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's head over now to lwn.net for the worst designed website of the week and the worst headline of the week, the end of scientific Linux.
All right.
That's it.
So
That's all we got.
lwn.net, I can see what you're saying. It looks like a terribly designed website, but they actually do a great job because it's a web-based version of the Linux mailing lists that are kind of where all the kernel development happens. So it is not...
It's literally just an email.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically... Well,
All right.
that's how all Linux kernel development started back in the 90s, and it's kind of stayed that way. But
Why change?
aside from that, the end of Scientific Linux... Scientific Linux has been a distro that's been around for a long, long time. In fact, last week we were just talking about the CentOS 15th birthday, right? It's been around 15 years. Well, most people know CentOS, that it is a free compiled version of the Red Hat Enterprise Linux source code. So if you want to run Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but not pay the fees, you run CentOS. Well, CentOS wasn't the only one. There's also Scientific Linux, which is also compiled from the Red Hat Enterprise Linux source code. And over the years, many people have debated whether or not we really needed 2 different community releases for RHEL. And there have been arguments for why we keep Scientific Linux around, for why CentOS is the one, and so on, but there was never a decisive winner. Well, now there is. It's been announced that Scientific Linux will not be updated for the RHEL 8.0 releases and going forward. Scientific Linux 6 and 7 are still going to be supported at least for a little while, but 8 will not be released. So if you're looking to run RHEL 8 in a community release, CentOS will now be one of your only options. It just means there's one less distro. And to be honest with you guys, there are a ton of distros that are out there. It takes a lot of work to maintain a distro, to keep it updated, to recompile every time a new version comes out. It takes a lot of effort. And you kind of look at it and say, is it really worth it? Or are we fragmenting the dev pool out there? Could we be pushing these resources into one of the other distros? And in this case, I think that's just the decision they reached is, it's time to stop this fork.
Yeah, that was my question. Is this like Highlander now where CentOS gets
one.
the power from the one that it killed off?
So I read a little bit about Scientific Linux. Back in grad school, we used a couple of other distros that were specific to ours. But the main goal was to make it to where the tools or the programs, the drivers that were very specific to our environment kind of work together easily. Reading a little bit about this, that was kind of the initial impetus for Fermilab. We want to make this very compatible. We want to keep things up to date. It is a lot of work, but this actually kind of plays into the last story a little bit, right? That's trying to remove these platform issues by making the web accessible. I don't think Fermilab's going to be used Chrome browser to do their computation, but it is in the scientific community. It does get interesting because it can be very difficult, and hopefully they can redirect those efforts somewhere else.
Yeah, into Pyodide, right?
Yeah, Pyodide, exactly. Yeah. I think they might take issue. They're like, no, it's iodide. It's iodide.
Well, either way. So in this case, Scientific Linux has been around a long time, so it is sad to see it go. But I believe it actually will be like Highlander. I imagine most of the developers will simply move on over to CentOS. There are some people out there who are not happy about this, that the CentOS team is largely controlled by Red Hat employees these days. So you do lose a little bit of, I don't want to say you lose transparency, but the independence of the project, I guess. But hey, if you feel that way, you can always spin off your own.
You can spin off your own. Yeah, that's the whole thing about open source. If there's enough people upset about it, someone else can take the flag and run with it from there. So
there you go.
Go for it. Put your money where your mouth is. All right. We have a treat for you today because normally we end on a funny, strange, weird story, and this week we had 2 to deal with. And which one do you have first? Do you have the Daily Mail? Okay, good.
Yep.
So on the dailymail.co.uk, they might be in for a surprise. Flat Earthers are planning a trip to Antarctica to reach the end of the world. And the reason that I put this article in here originally to talk about is because it talks about how the cruise ships use GPS and things that rely on a spherical Earth model to navigate. So they're all trusting themselves to otherwise the boat would just go in circles, I'm assuming.
Yeah, the irony is very
your processing,
very strong in this one, but it's led by the same individual who launched a rocket into trying to get the edge of space. So you can see whether
it's
it's
the
around
same guy that's doing this expedition, or
I think so, right?
Is it? This is
I didn't see that when I read
the
through
Flat Earth International Conference, which is not associated with the Flat Earth Society. So I don't know which one your guy was with, but that's Robbie Davidson. He clarified that the 2020 excursion is just a cruise, and the group isn't yet shooting to find the ice shore at the end of the world. But I mean, they're going to find one down in Antarctica, if that's where they're headed.
So, my question here is, why do you have to go to Antarctica, right? If it's a flat Earth, couldn't you go in any direction? Like for me,
That's
I would
closest.
I'd pick a warmer climate and just go west, right? I mean,
how's the ice wall going to work? Yeah, that's my question. If you look at the images that they've got, the second image down, which is odd because the first image, that one just has the ice on the where Antarctica is, not all the way around. So I'm not sure what's holding the water on. But if you go down a little bit further, there's another representation of the flat Earth, which has the ice wall surrounding it, and somehow gravity is causing that to fall off. But so my question is, how do they think you take a boat from California to Japan? Because you're just going to run into that wall, right? Why don't they go that way?
So I feel like this is a confirmation bias because if we go to Antarctica, I can say, look, there's the ice wall,
Exactly.
right? I made sure that I can tell people, yeah, we reached the edge of the Earth. There's the ice wall. We can't go beyond that.
Shouldn't you be able to cross over the ice wall?
If you
you
cross
wanna
the ice wall,
die.
you're going down and landing on the turtle.
You should see a chasm, though, right? Not just you walk
No, it's too
across.
far to see. We can't see that far. There's
Because the
number one,
curvature of the...
I will say I was wrong. It's not the same guy, but the fact that there's 2 expeditions that are relying on large spherical Earth model scientific principles to accomplish both of them blows my mind. And just the fact that in bold it says heliocentrism is a government conspiracy.
Wait, just to clarify, in that picture of the flat Earth there, that's a round moon in the background, right?
Yeah, no, but
Well, it's just turned this way.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's just
okay.
turned this way.
Just happened
It's
to-
turned this way. And then the sun is revolving around the Earth.
Well, sure, that
Yeah,
part
yeah.
I agree with.
Oh man,
Now,
there's so many things.
I feel like the flat earthers are really just like internet trolls. I can't fathom they actually believe
I
this,
watched the
but-
whole video on this one. I got sucked in on this article and watched a video from a guy just debating somebody, and it... yeah, he's. I don't
Do
think
you
he's
feel
a
like they
troll.
genuinely
Oh, I don't think
believe?
he was a troll. I think he was. And the other guy just pointed out to him, you can't start with a conclusion and then find evidence to support it, because you'll only you'll discount all the evidence.
You
that
only
doesn't
find
support
the
it.
evidence that you
Yeah.
need in order to support
And-
said conclusion.
But these people that are gullible or easily influenced can see a video like this and say, oh, well, that makes sense. That's fact because it's out here on the internet.
I actually have a similar thing to you, Don. I think it's a bunch of internet trolls. It was people who were able to start, and they found that others were like, "Oh yeah." I think it's an exploitation scheme. It seems like a way to exploit people, right? Because this guy goes, "We're going on a cruise. Who's paying for the cruise? Right? Is he paying for the cruise?"
Yeah, I know.
Or
I
is
know
it-
with any of those cruise lines, if you get enough rooms in your block, yours is free.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's just the stuff that I think it's funny at the end of this article, the captain, the cruise captain, he was like, I've been doing this a long time. I've never met a sea captain that thinks the earth is flat.
Well, because they've all fallen off.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
The logic
Yeah.
is strong with
Yeah,
it. I'm
see?
joking.
Dead men tell no tales.
All right, our other ridiculous article for this week, equally as good. This one is from WCVB ABC 5 in Salem, Massachusetts. Maybe is that where this one is?
I
Or
have no
Salem, North Carolina.
Salem, Oregon.
North Carolina. Well, no, because it's a W.
Oh, that's
It would
right.
be a K if it were Oregon. We've discussed this.
We learned that last week.
But it's over on MSN. It has this one. Man ordered by court to remove 2,000 boxes of printers from his yard. That's a lot of printers. And Don, have you been able to get to the bottom of this?
All right, this article piqued my interest, and for those of you out there in TV land who say Don doesn't research articles, this one absolutely proves you wrong, because this piqued my interest, and I have dug and done all of the investigative research I could. I cannot find anywhere where somebody says why this guy even had 2,000 printer boxes in the first place. But I was able to find some better pictures. Let me show you this one.
good.
Here's an aerial view of the guy's house. And this is coming from chch.com.
It looks like snow
It-
because it's all white boxes. just
these are
surrounding the house.
stacks and stacks of printer boxes, and most of them are like HP multifunction or HP LaserJet printers. The kind of stuff you'd use in home or small office, not commercial grade printers. And he's got stacks of them. They do appear to be empty, so it's not like the printers.
Yeah,
are
that was the
inside of them.
question. Are there printers in these boxes?
And I guess, he started off with a few hundred, and neighbors asked him about it, and he said, oh, they'll be gone within a week. And then it got to 1,000, and he kept saying, oh, yeah, they'll be gone before you know it. And now they're estimating there's over 2,000 printer boxes in this guy's backyard. And finally, the city is stepping in and saying, look, we're going to clear that out, and then we're going to bill you for it. I want to know, why does he have so many boxes? Like, I'm trying to build, what is the story that would make this make sense? Maybe he got some kind of contract with the school board, and he is installing these printers and discarding the box. It just doesn't make sense.
Leave them at the school.
I'd throw them in a garbage can on the way from the school. The only thing I can think of is this is like hoarder behavior, right? It's some kind of compulsion due to a stressor or something. I'm not a trained psychologist,
Yeah.
nor do I play one, but this seems like an impulsive behavior type.
Well, let's pretend for a moment, okay? Let's just pretend the three of us, we are now printer box obsessed. Where do you go to get 2,000 printer boxes?
Behind Staples?
Staples still around?
That's the thing.
So you get what, like 5 a week?
Yeah. Nah, you put an ad on Craigslist.
But they're all the same too. It's like they all look identical. So or similar.
I did see some close-up pictures, and there were different printer models involved.
So it's a collection.
I don't
Okay.
believe they
eBay.
were all the same.
Definitely go on
historian.
eBay.
Well,
We'll buy printer boxes.
Maybe this is where the boxes go when you give them to the recycler. They just take them and drop them at this guy's house.
Very specific, though, printer boxes.
That's true.
Secretly.
Yeah.
That's true.
I will say the estimation of how much it's going to cost, how much they're going to bill him for, I was like, that seems kind
Was
of
it like
absorbent.
15 grand?
$15,000 to $18,000.
That's
You ever see the "You Got Junk" people that drive around?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a national
I
thing
think
for
it's a
people outside
1-800
of Florida,
Stop
but
Junk or something like that. Yeah.
we tore down an old swing set and called them, and they wanted like $800 to get rid of that. It's just swing set.
And they're going to take it and
sell it.
recycle the scrap.
So
Yeah, or if it was metal, they'll go weigh their truck and they'll get
Exactly.
money for it.
Hey, 15 to 18,000. I could say. Oh, and just for reference, we did not pay that. I threw it in the car and took it to the dump myself.
I mean, if I'm collecting boxes, it's going to be refrigerator boxes, and I'm building a fort like you've
Yeah,
never
you
seen.
know
Nice.
it. Maybe that's what's under it. Maybe it's
More-
a really
more
extravagant like fort. Or it's
Yeah.
the roof for his refrigerator box fort.
Well, if I were him, I would take those boxes to the edge of the globe and just throw them over the ice
Wow.
wall.
Yeah,
Yeah,
into the sun.
that would work.
Depends on which side you go.
Yeah.
But
So
okay.
I did do a lot of research. I actually watched a video of his court appearance and so on, and at no point does he mention why he's acquired these. I'm really curious if any of you out there in TV land happen to find out. Please let us know via social media or info@technado.com, or you should email there.
And it is Salem, Mass, because it's Boston's. They're called Boston's news leader.
So the witches have compelled him to do it?
Again, could be.
More than likely.
Never know. All right. Well, as promised, we do have a couple of big interviews today to get to. Actually, earlier this week, we had an opportunity, Justin and I, to kick Don out of his seat and bring in Matt Carroll, who is a senior software engineer at Google for the Flutter team. And had you heard of Flutter before this? You kind of
I'd played with Flutter a little bit. It was in its early stages when I messed with it, but I went and checked it out. I will say I've played with it the last couple of days after that. I built speaking of Electron, the memory leak thing was an issue, so I built currently experimental a Mac OS app that you just double click, it runs just like any other Mac OS app, and I intentionally left it running for about 36 hours to see if it had that memory leak. No, it did not. Not now. It was very simple. I wasn't doing a lot of things, so could be interesting. I would be interesting to see how the project plays out.
All right, well, let's take a quick break and then come back with Matt Carroll and watch that interview all about Flutter. Stay tuned.
My name is Dana Morrison. I'm the IT director at Grace Christian School in Raleigh, North Carolina. IT directors often hoard so much knowledge that it's hard for their team members to learn. IT Pro TV has given us the ability to level up our technicians to a point where they can decide, this is important for me to learn. I would recommend IT Pro TV to any IT team. It's just a great tool for any IT professional.
Welcome back to Technado, and as promised, we have a very special interview right here in the studio today. We've kicked Don out of his seat, and we've brought in Matt Carroll, who's a senior software engineer at Google for the Flutter team. How you doing, Matt?
Doing well. How about you guys?
We're doing pretty good. Are you doing good? I don't wanna
I'm
answer
doing
for both
fairly.
of us.
Yeah, Peter's like, well, hold on. Let me.
We are great.
We are great. I'm like, I'm all right, I guess.
So you're joining us from where? You're out in California?
Yep,
typically?
based in Mountain View, Google's main campus. That's where the primary Flutter team is.
And so you were you went to University of Florida?
I did.
Okay, so we're based here in Gainesville, Florida. That's where we're doing this. So you're back probably Easter visiting some family, and we're like, oh, we got to get this guy in the studio. So for those, I think most people have probably heard of Google at this point, but for those that aren't familiar with Flutter, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Flutter's all about?
Sure. So Flutter is a portable UI toolkit created by Google, written in Dart. Dart is a programming language for those who don't know. And the origin of Dart is that it was kind of an alternative to JavaScript least that's how it was intended, but didn't quite take off in that regard. So it's now been utilized by Flutter to create this UI toolkit. And what I mean by UI toolkit is that where certain frameworks help you build an entire application, like let's say Ruby on Rails, for example, Flutter isn't like that. It's not here to tell you how to build your app. It's just here to say, here are some great tools and APIs for building a user interface. Take it wherever you want. And out of the box, Flutter deploys to Android and iOS. So you can build Android apps and iOS apps with user interfaces built with Flutter.
So is it specific to just mobile apps then?
In terms of official support right now, it is. But the mission of Flutter is actually to go to pretty much any screen. So the team is officially working on web support, actually. It's not in a public state yet, but they're working on it, and they announced that late last year. And then there are also some community efforts to bring Flutter to desktop. We'll see where those go, but some people are already using it actually on desktop in that regard.
So where are we in Flutter's lifecycle then? Because I was looking back, and it looked like, was it a year ago or so that the initial beta was released, but
it went
fully
through,
public now?
It went through alpha. Yeah, definitely public. It's been public for quite some time. It went through alpha and beta pretty quickly. I'd say that probably from 2015 to 2017, there was a lot of early experimentation. And then from 2017 to present, it's very rapidly gone through alpha, beta, 1.0 is, well, we're 1.x right now. So we're stable, absolutely public. We have startups that are using it. We have big companies like Alibaba that have begun to adopt Flutter. So it's now in that stage of kind of probably exponential growth is what we'll see.
So what's your role specifically on the Flutter team?
So I'm a developer, and so Flutter actually, interestingly, has a number of different roles within the same org. So we have dedicated UX researchers that help us understand where are developers getting caught up in Flutter, where are they slowing down, how can we help them. We have a developer relations team, which would normally be the kind of person you'd have on a show like this. They go around the world, they speak at conferences, they do the I/O presentations. And then we have the development team, which is split half and half between what's called the framework and the engine. So the framework is the Dart code that most Flutter developers will interact with over time. The engine is the part that kind of gets you onto the different platforms. It's got C++, it's got Java for Android, it's got Objective-C for iOS. And we have developers roughly split between those two areas.
So if I'm building an app for the first time, I don't need to know those other languages. I don't need to know the things that are happening on the back end. I just need to know Dart.
That's generally true with some caveats. So certainly for building a user interface, all you need is Dart because that's the Flutter APIs. But let's say that iOS or Android comes out with some new sensor that you'd like to access in your app. At that point, you would need to cross from Dart over to the Java Objective-C side so you can utilize the sensor. But Flutter comes with these things called method channels or platform channels, depending on where you look at them. And that allows you to cross this boundary so that anything you can do on the platform, you can at least access it from your Dart code, your Flutter system. So again, if you're building just a user interface or a simple app that doesn't need new stuff, absolutely all Dart. But if you want to connect to new pieces of hardware, you may need to write those connections yourself.
I think we should come back to this. We got super technical real fast there.
I got super technical?
Yeah, you're like,
Oh,
let me
yeah.
ask questions. And he went all techie on us. I mean, I was enjoying it.
I
Those
understood
of you-
most of it. I'm impressed.
I am so proud of you,
Thanks.
Peter. I know.
I'm growing
It
up.
is you should mark it down. It's an eventful day. But let's back up.
Sure.
You know, you're from Gainesville and went to school here. You're in Mountain View now. How did you end up on the Flutter team? Like, how did you get into this in general? And just kind of take us through that journey.
All right, let's go relive the last 6 or 7 years.
All right, I mean mine.
Let's do it.
That's not
I'm
mine,
ready.
but we can relive yours.
Sure. So when I finished school here, I did a master's in digital art and science over at the Digital Worlds Institute. When I finished that, I tried to do some small business startup work in Gainesville, tried to create a startup of my own. That failed pretty quickly, jumped between some smaller companies, and then kind of started a one-man app shop here in town. That eventually elevated to the point where I did some contract work on an app for the NFL. NFL Now was a video streaming app, and then they shut it down a year after it was built. But eventually that progression led me to working for Nest. So I went and interviewed out with Nest. They offered me a job. I took it, and I spent 3 years actually working on the main Nest app. So if you've ever had a smoke detector go off for Nest or your security system, I may have built part of that screen, unless it's crashing, in which case I had nothing to do with it. That wasn't
I'm
me.
just trying to cook. Nest.
These eggs need to be
It's
crunchy.
not a fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
So I spent 3 years doing that, and towards the end of that tenure, I discovered Flutter. We were doing a prototype internally. And so anytime you start a new app, from a due diligence perspective, you want to look at the landscape and say, what are the technologies? Are we sure that we want to stick with what we've been doing, or do we want to move to something else? So we started investigating this thing called Flutter, which I honestly hadn't heard of before late 2017. So we started prototyping with it, and I was essentially able to recreate the Nest login screen with networking, with animation in a day. I had never written a line of Dart code. I've never written a line of Flutter code up to that point. Again, within a day, I had that screen done. At that point, I said, this is what we want for this prototype. Let's use it. We spent about 6 months working on that prototype. Eventually, there was a reorganization, which tends to happen in these big companies, and it morphed into a different project. But over that 6 months, I explored a lot of what Flutter had to offer, kind of read through the widget catalog, which I would recommend for anyone who wants to get started. Essentially, it's a catalog of all the different UI pieces that come out of the box. So I worked through that. I got to understand how Flutter worked. And then when there was that reorg at Nest and that project kind of disappeared, I had a choice. I could either go back to the main Nest app and be a native Android developer, which I guess I should have pointed that out. I was a native Android developer for that 7 years. Or I could leave Android behind, which is a big deal. It's leaving 7 years of experience, all that knowledge that I had, but then I could go become a Flutter developer. And that's actually the decision that I made, because I don't see much reason for people to invest in the technical debt of Android and iOS much longer. There will always be some projects that probably need it, but Flutter is so much faster and easier. It allows you to express so much more in the user interface that I said, this is going to be the future as far as I'm personally concerned. I'm going to go join the team and help them build it.
So were you with Nest before they were acquired, or you joined Nest when they were part of
After
Google?
acquired, yeah.
Okay, very cool.
Okay. We went from Android. We came to Flutter. You threw down the gauntlet on that. You're like, just don't worry about it. Just use Flutter. But your 7 years of experience, you said, I've never written Dart code. I've never written Flutter code. However, I do have to come back and ask. Dart was part of, you had like the Dart VM, which was an alternative to JavaScript. It was built into Chrome for a little while, right? Mm-hmm. Why choose Dart for this project instead of, I don't know, maybe JavaScript or TypeScript? Obviously, that's a Microsoft product, but why Dart in this case?
Yep, so it's a good question. I was actually talking to some students last night who had a similar question. And actually, one of the things that we've heard internally, especially for Android developers, is why not Kotlin? Because we just took Android developers from Java to Kotlin. They're like, at a minimum, give us that language. Now, I don't have really great insight into the technical details, except one that has come up a number of times, is that when you're building user interfaces with Flutter, you're creating these trees of widgets. They get extremely deep, hundreds of widgets, and it can be per frame. So you're instantiating objects 60 times a second, a lot of them, and recycling them. Apparently, Dart has a garbage collection system that is really optimized for that capability. And my understanding is that when investigations were done into the JVM, for example, that wasn't what the JVM was created to do, and it was creating a bottleneck in terms of performance. And so when analysis was done, eventually the team at the time decided that Dart was the right language for that purpose.
Okay, so that makes sense for Dart. Actually, I've read a little bit about this. Not necessarily a Flutter print. The Dart language was very interesting to me. I've played around a little bit with it and heard similar things from other people. However, we got Dart, we have Flutter. You said it's desktop support. Is that something that Dart's going to help lend itself to? Unofficial community desktop support, right? Mm-hmm. Is Dart going to help with that? It seems like maybe a JVM language would be a better fit there, or do you know how that kind of plays into things?
So given that literally your widget trees are written in Dart, if ever there were to be a different language introduced, it would mean that whatever you wrote previously or for a different platform, you could not reuse because you're literally jumping languages. So from that perspective, I wouldn't see any reason that you'd want to switch languages. And the idea behind this multi-platform approach is that you truly can take the same widget tree, whether it's Android, iOS, desktop, or even web, and you will get the same visual representation. Flutter is working very hard to avoid that uncanny valley where you take the same code and it's very similar but not quite the same. Flutter wants it to be the same. In fact, whether it's Android, iOS, or eventually even desktop, the way that Flutter achieves this is by bringing a renderer with it. The Skia rendering system is actually built into the app. So no matter which of those platforms you go to, you're sending drawing instructions essentially through the same rendering system, painting the same pixels. And this is what allows Flutter essentially to do visually in terms of similarity what I don't think any other option to date has been able to accomplish. But again, at the root of that is a widget tree, which is currently written in Dart. So changing languages would kind of mess up that ability to just move your UI between those different platforms.
Now, okay, that makes sense to me. I mean, hopefully it makes sense to Peter, right, Peter?
I got a good portion of that.
It's a good day. So how that makes sense. I've played a little bit with React Native. It kind of promises the same thing. I've actually experienced what you've talked about, that weird kind of lull where you're like, I need to do this one thing. Is that one of the focal points of Flutter, is to like totally eliminate that? And if so, is that going to set it apart from other projects such as React Native? Or I looked at the Ionic project lately. It's doing some different things that it did at one point. But is that kind of one of its mission statements to set itself apart? Or are there other core values that you're really driving forward with as well?
Sure. So I would say that Flutter has a certain set of goals that it claims, and those goals aren't in comparison to any other technology. It's not like, oh, we want to be the this of that kind of thing. It's not like Flutter is trying, for example, to push out React Native. In fact, we get asked a lot about React Native externally. Internally, we never really talk about it. We have the Flutter goals. And it's like, are we hitting those goals? So you asked about what those goals might be. So we want to help developers build beautiful user interfaces. That's one of them. Rapidly is another goal. So you move quickly. And it needs to be performant. And performant is that combination of beauty and performance. It's kind of like a pick two situation, right? Two of those three. Flutter's hitting all three. So you can get beauty, but then you're down in kind of low-level native code. It takes a lot of work. Or you can get rapidly and performant, but it doesn't look very good. So Flutter is really trying to hit all three of those. And you mentioned React Native. So my understanding of React Native is that you write JavaScript, which you can share as, let's say, your business logic between your platforms. But then that JavaScript crosses a bridge over to the platform to create the user interface, so that our Android developers out there would recognize that you would actually have a recycler view in the activity, or our iOS developers would know that you would have a UI table view in your view controller. That's not how Flutter works. So Flutter does not utilize the platform view hierarchy. It has its own widget system and literally paints every pixel on the screen. So there are no recycler views. There are no UI table views. And again, that gives you, so you can bring a designer in and essentially say, what ideas do you have? We can actually sit at the keyboard and try them together, because Flutter offers something called hot reload. This is also very new to mobile. I'm sure you guys have used it on web, right? You make some changes, you save your JavaScript file or HTML or CSS, and it updates immediately. You haven't been able to do that in mobile up to this point. So Flutter actually brings the ability to make changes to that widget tree, press save, and within half a second, your emulator, your simulator, or your physical device is reflecting those changes.
I have to be completely honest. So this morning I went through the little getting started guide, because I hadn't played with Flutter. I'd heard about it, I don't know, a year or so ago. And I was like, well, in preparation for today, I should probably give it a go. Took me a little bit to set up the tool sets. I didn't worry about the Android one. I'm on a Mac. And I was hoping to find something where I could say, I got you. But I can vouch for the reload. I was actually pretty impressed as playing with some of those other projects. Sometimes it's really painful. You're like, all right, I got to stop this and turn this back on, and click, and then there's like, a rain dance and some maraca shaking, and then finally you get a reload. But I do want to back up, because you said we're focused on performance. Mm-hmm. Now, could you give us an idea of what kind of performance, like you said 60 frames per second, but how is that being achieved? Could you give us a little deeper dive on how that's being achieved? Because some of these other projects that maybe have an overlap of goals, sometimes I've done things poorly, I'll say, that are not very performant.
Sure. So there are people much better equipped to give you a good answer to that question, but I'll give you two areas where performance is reflected in how Flutter actually operates. So one thing is that, and this again is a juxtaposition with something like React Native, which is that Flutter, when you build it for release mode, it compiles down to ARM code. That's binary, that's processor code. There is not a runtime interpreter, nor is there a just-in-time compiler when you build for release mode. Now, React Native, I believe, sticks with JavaScript even at runtime. So you literally have the V8 engine, let's say, interpreting JavaScript in your mobile app. That's a performance bottleneck. So Flutter said, we don't want to have that built in. We really want to get down to the metal. And so Dart code will compile down to binary for your mobile architecture. And again, same if you go to desktop or whatever, once you target those platforms. So that's one way that you get performance, is that we avoid the interpretation and just-in-time compiling bottleneck. Another area is that Flutter is very much about compositing your user interface. So let's go back to 2008, when mobile technology came on the market. We had these very low performance devices. And in that world, it was long before anyone expected animation in their user interface, right? It was like, there's a text box and I need to be able to type stuff. The way that was achieved is that as you were typing, you would invalidate the rectangle just for the text entry. The rest of the screen would not repaint, just the smallest possible rectangle. And that was a good optimization in a world where you're not sliding things and covering things and animating things. But then customers had higher and higher expectations for these user interfaces. And when you slide something all the way across the screen, you invalidate everything beneath it, everything on the screen. So you're essentially redrawing the entire user interface every frame, and this led to performance issues. But you can literally see that notion built into the API. There's like invalidate rect, I think, is one of the methods you can call in the Android view hierarchy. Flutter's perspective is you actually have a number of pieces to the user interface that don't redraw themselves very often, but they tend to overlap and move around each other. So we're just going to draw these layers to GPU textures and then run compositing where you put them where you want them relative to each other, because the GPU is extraordinarily fast when it comes to position, transform, things like that. So Flutter has a compositional approach really baked into it, and I think that's where we also see a lot of that performance.
That's one of those things that always seems magical to me. Like, it's very, very hard to do. Is that a significant amount of work that's still going on? These because you talk about web technology. So virtual DOM, you got a diff. You only want to update the pieces that need to be updated. But it's a little bit different than what you described. I have these things. I'm not going to mess with them. I'm kind of just going to slide them over. It almost looks like an up-close card trick. Is that ultimately what's being driven for?
Is this magic?
Is this magic? I guess. Yeah.
I didn't bring my wizard's cap.
Yeah. Well, luckily for you. No, I'm joking. We don't have wizard's caps.
Yeah. We have to wear them in the office with our wand.
Man, we need those here.
Well, Justin's app that he created today has already got 1 million downloads.
Yeah.
And is now profitable. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, I guess I can leave, right?
When's the liquidity event?
I don't know.
Soon.
I don't know.
Well, speaking of which, that was a question I had. So, so this is open source. This is free
Excellent
for anybody
point.
to get in there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, all of Flutter is open source. The idea here, so part of the issues that have been seen with, let's just call them cross-platform solutions, though there are, what qualifies as that doesn't matter, but just take kind of the general notion of cross-platform solutions. There's this sense that eventually you get stuck in a box. Eventually there's something you can't do that you need to do. And Flutter has really tried to prevent that at every level. So I mentioned before this idea of crossing but from Dart to the platform and back. That's one of the areas where we have what you call an escape hatch. If you truly can't do it in Dart and Flutter, you can get out. Another area is open source. The fact that it's open source, you can fork the entire Flutter project, make whatever modifications you want, and we have seen some companies do that. You can therefore add to the engine a capacity to go to a platform of your choice. One of our engine engineers actually put a Medium post out where he explained how to get Flutter on a Raspberry Pi. So if you have your proprietary technology, you can port Flutter to it by forking that engine. But yes, it's all open source. You can read all the lines of code. And another great part of that is that when you're in the IDE, which would be Android Studio or IntelliJ IDEA or VS Code, those are the officially supported IDEs, you can jump into the source code. So if you're using a widget that came with the platform, it's not hidden, it's not in a binary, you can jump right in, And not only can you see the source code, but it will be typically covered in comments to help you understand that source code. And you can jump down 3, 4, 5 levels into that code. And this is all a function of the fact that it's open source and free.
So is Google doing this out of the goodness of their hearts? I mean, I know they've got a lot of money, so they're good. But you know, I could see it if it was, you know, this pushes people to build on Android exclusively. But you know, it's you know, cross platform there. So is there monetization built in at all, or?
Not that I'm aware of. I think one of the primary drivers actually is that Google is working on an operating system, which has been roughly discussed. It's Fuchsia. And Flutter is intended to be kind of the default UI system for that operating system. So that's a major internal driver. But of course, you want to prove it out. You want to make sure it works wherever it can. And by the way, if it can go everywhere, you know, why not take it everywhere? But of course, at this point, we have internal customers. We have teams within Google that are using Flutter. And also we've seen traction externally. So at this point, it's kind of set. But I think the initial major driver was the notion that it will be used in that operating system.
You heard it here first. Breaking news.
I sure hope not.
I don't think that's fair.
Right? Is that
No,
not
no,
right?
I've heard of
Ah,
Fuchsia.
dang it.
I've read some similar things.
All right.
You made me forget what I asked you. How dare you?
Sorry about that.
So Flutter almost seems like the promised land. I'm not going to lie. I will say, like the documentation, I played around with the VS Code extension this morning when I was, messing around, and it enforces like comments at the end of widgets or, children's of widgets, which brings me to another question. One of the biggest issues that I have sometimes with frameworks is, oh yeah, you can do that. Which one of the 1,000 ways can you do that? I know you talked about developer experience to some extent. The Flutter project, are they really pushing for this is the Flutter way, or are they giving you latitude to? I know we have the escape hatches, like the meth channels and stuff, but as far as like code organization, build types, what's the story around that?
There are many different levels to that question because there are a lot of different things that you can do differently.
Yeah.
Let's start with the language. So I believe there is an official style guide for Dart, like a Dart formatting guide, and I believe you can even load that into your IDE if you want to. So you could say that when you're writing Dart code, there is a particular way in terms of spacing and line breaks and things like that, that it would be ideal for you to use, at least to match the rest of the industry. Then we need to make a really important distinction, which is between the user interface and your application logic. And mobile developers, I think, are notorious for combining these two things. Back in the day, it was done for performance reasons. Unfortunately, the history of that has still led mobile developers to combine them. But Flutter, again, first and foremost, is a UI toolkit. It's not an application framework. So it's here to give you these widgets that you can compose any way you want. But then you might ask, okay, well, how should I do my networking? Where should I put my Redux store? That kind of stuff. Flutter has no opinion about that, really, with one kind of qualifier, which is that we've received a lot of questions about it. And so some members of the team put together, actually it was, I think it was AdWords, came up with this notion of blocks, business logic components, which was kind of a recommendation for how to use Dart within Flutter to build out your business rules and connect it to that Flutter user interface. And so at I/O, I think 2018, Philip presented blocks publicly to explain that concept, and there have been many tutorials written since then. But even blocks is just kind of a way of saying, here is something you could do if you wanted to. You don't have to. We're not necessarily even recommending it, but if you truly can't wrap your head around where to stick your business rules in a Flutter app, here's an example. And I actually think that's really important because the flame wars over the acronyms MVC, MVP, MVVM, it drives me nuts. And we waste so much time and energy on it. So on the one hand, I understand why new developers are like, just tell me how to do it. On the other hand, we wouldn't want to suggest to the industry that these block things are the only way you can do it, because eventually someone's going to try it and they're going to think, this is not good for me at all, but this is the Flutter way. I guess Flutter's bad. We want to avoid that kind of conclusion as well.
So it seems like we're going to give you some key points, some hey, try this out, especially for people who are just getting started, because, for me, I haven't done a great deal of native app development, but it actually falls in line with some other experience that I've had based on my limited experience over today and the previous time. So I might give it a go. I like to have here's a good place to get started. Here's where you want, foot gun. I don't want a foot gun, but I also have the latitude to go, you know what, that pattern's just not working for me. I can kind of deviate from that. And part of that, you said a Redux store. Is that part of your state management solution, or are there other? I know you had like a stateless widget and a stateful widget. Those are built in, but then if you need something a little larger spread, then that's where you can deviate.
Right. So the widgets, whether it's stateless or stateful, again, those are really just about the UI. So, like at a technical level, let's talk for a minute about a switch. Every app has these pages with the switches that go back and forth. You tap it, it goes from on to off. Literally, the ability to remember whether it's on or off in Flutter requires a stateful widget by the name of it, because stateless means we're not tracking anything. We remember nothing from frame to frame. So you build as much with stateless widgets as you can, but then where you need to remember something, you use a stateful widget. That's kind of an heuristic. And some people, like, they think in their mind that stateful is some kind of significant performance bottleneck, and they try to avoid them at all costs. Don't do that. It is not a significant bottleneck. It's just that all things being equal, if you can use stateless, that's great. Otherwise, go stateful. But really, neither of those constructs deal with any sophisticated structure of state. So whether it's blocks, whether it's a Redux store, whether it's a database, those are all much more significant systems than a stateful widget. So often, a stateful widget might hold a reference, let's say, to a Redux store or a database or something like that, and that's how it remembers the information. Or you can just drop a few variables in there that you want to hold on to. But Flutter does, again, the only thing that I think anyone on the team has officially covered are blocks. There is a community Redux store implementation. I think there are some other similar alternatives as well. The recommendation that I would give to anyone starting with Flutter is you start with nothing and wait until there's something you can't solve and allow yourself to build up. Because the reason that you're asking about that solution, the reason that you feel like you need something is because you don't really understand Flutter yet. That's why you're asking for someone to give you something. Well, if you start with some complicated state management solution before you understand Flutter, odds are that's not going to turn out well. So just jump in, build your user interface, even do some hacks if you need to get your state working. But once you truly understand how Flutter works, you'll be in a much better position to actually make your own decision about what the state management should look like.
That's not how I go. I try to pour as much dependencies in my applications as possible. I'm joking. I'm actually more of a minimalist.
It happens a lot. I mean, I can't count the number of web developers that I've watched who start a new web project, and the first thing they do is drop in a Redux store. Like, but why? Like, do you need time travel? Because that's what Redux was created to do, right? Time travel in JavaScript.
Well, I mean, if I'm writing a Back to the Future app, absolutely.
Yeah. Right? So the one or two of you out there, that's the right choice. But I mean, everyone else, it's like, shouldn't you maybe build some of your features first and then figure it out,
And I can actually jump along with that same advice. I have, admittedly so, there are times where I've unintentionally made things way more complicated than they needed to have been in order to achieve a goal. Right? Someone was like, hey, I need you to build a switch. And you're like, you know what I need? Lots of jQuery, Angular, and React, and just
that's right.
Redux, maybe some MobX. I don't know. Just pour it on there, and just for fun, a little bit of Thermite. Just so I go along with this guy.
Hey, so I'm convinced. I'm ready to start. I mean, Justin's had this great success, with his Flutter app.
I don't know if I'd call it a success.
So where would I go to get started, learn more, all that stuff?
Sure. So Flutter's official website is flutter.dev, and I'm sure you will find from there links to getting started, the widget catalog, guides. In fact, there are guides that say essentially, if you're an Android developer, here's how you can approach Flutter. If you're an iOS developer, here's how you can approach Flutter. So there are transition guides that will help with that. Also, there is now an official Flutter YouTube channel. It was previously baked into the Google channel, but now it's youtube.com/FlutterDev. And then Flutter is on Twitter @FlutterDev. And I also have some personal resources, which aren't official, aren't related to the team, just my own stuff. But I'm on Twitter @Fluttery, FLTTRY. And I also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Fluttery, where I have about 10 videos where I live code user interfaces. So if you want to see, and this was actually back most of it was before I joined the Flutter team. So this was
It's like you learning it,
right?
Kind of going through that process.
In fact, to your guys' earlier point of this sounds too good to be true, that kind of thing. When I first heard about it, I said that there's no way Flutter is going to be good. I've heard this story before. Yeah. It's going to be garbage. It's not going to be performant. You can't use it for big apps. When I started creating those videos, I called them Flutter challenges. And people have thought, oh, I'm challenging myself to create these user interfaces. But that actually wasn't it at all.
I want to see if Flutter can do
That's right.
what I think it does.
I said, Flutter, you've promised all of these amazing things.
Yeah.
Prove to me that you can do it. So I sat down and I figured out how to create these user interfaces. And to throw one example out there is I recreated Tinder's card swiping user interface. And all of those videos are between 1.5 and 3.5 hours. And I go from a new project to the finished result in that period of time. So essentially, just from a UI perspective, I built Tinder's main UI in 3 hours. That's half of one day of work, right? Yeah. So by the time I got through 2 or 3 of those videos, that's when Flutter had proven itself to me. I was totally sold on it, and not long after that is when I decided again to leave Android behind and go become a Flutter developer full time. And you can watch all of those videos on my channel.
Very cool. Well, we'll put those links up for sure so that people can find that. And I want to thank you for flying all the way over here just to do
for you
Technado all the way from Mountain View.
Yeah,
right?
I don't even know how to react now. I'm sorry.
That was nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for joining us, and thank all of you for watching. But stay tuned. We've got more Technado coming up right after this.
I'm James Packer. I'm the General Manager of Kirk ISS based in the Cayman Islands. I used IT Pro TV extensively in my last place. It grew very well, helped upskill the team. I had 110 engineers in the field and we had dozens of IT Pro accounts with the guys training, and last year alone they passed over 40 certs by using the online training. I think I can safely say without IT Pro TV I wouldn't be where I was today, because I only got this job on the back of the qualifications I have.
All right, thank you so much to Matt for joining us, and that was pretty cool. I think I was actually impressed with how much I was able to understand. He did a really good job of putting it in lay terms, and I can kind of see the benefits of using a system like that.
Yeah, I can as well. I was kind of proud of you during that interview. I said it during the interview. I'll say it again. He went technical on us, Don. You missed it.
Well,
yeah.
I am a little upset that I've repeatedly in my career said, like, you can't talk to anybody at Google. It's impossible. And now I can't say that anymore because you guys went and talked to somebody at Google. Way to go.
Yeah, you can't talk to anyone at Google.
Yeah, you're on a blacklist, Don. He told us. He told us after the interview. I'm joking.
We're on that list now.
Yeah, we are.
After that. All right, well, we do have one more interview for you, and this one's coming to us remotely, all the way up from Washington, D.C., and it's someone that we've talked to in the past. This is Jonathan Couch, who's the Senior VP for Strategy over at ThreatQuotient, and it wasn't you that interviewed him. We had Daniel Lowry had interviewed him before at BSides Las Vegas, because they were in town, I think, for DEF CON, which is going around along at that same time. And we talked to somebody, or you talked to someone else from their company back at
a couple
RSA,
years ago.
2017 or 2016. So ThreatQuotient certainly someone that's been on our radar. But I mean, is that something that a lot of people know about in the industry? Is this a small company?
No, they're actually really well known. You can see them at most conferences. They're out there quite a bit. A couple of years ago, the whole idea of a security threat feed kind of was a bit of a buzzword. And the problem was there were tons and tons of companies that were offering these threat feeds. It was hard to pick which one was the best. So what they do is they just help you kind of combine them all into one feed, so you get the best of all the different providers that are out there. It's a really neat service, and that's one of the reasons why we've interviewed them over the years. And so it's a chance for us to check back in and kind of see what's new in their world.
Oh, shoot, I put threat assessment on mine, not
I
threat
also
feed,
have
and
that
you had
one,
threat. I just said it. I just said it for you.
You
shoot.
did.
But you got threat feed and threat assessment there. Well, that's a mistake on my part, because I knew this interview was coming up, and so I thought I'd put that one on there. But oh well.
What is that, Peter? What am I doing?
I don't. I don't know. You're checking the quality of your pen. You're not gonna fool me like that twice. 3 times. All right, well, let's take a look at that interview with John. We'll be back right after that here on Technado.
Enjoying Technado? Then be sure to check out Ignite, another podcast from the Pro TV network. Ignite highlights stories of leadership as host Vicky Guy interviews a new business person each week. Learn more at itpro.tv/podcasts.
Welcome back to Technado, and as promised, we are joined now by a familiar face to us here at IT Pro TV, someone we've interviewed in the past before. We have John Couch from ThreatQuotient, and he is the Senior Vice President of Strategy. I wanted to say strategery now after Don said that earlier, I think. But John, how you doing?
Good. I'm thinking of changing my title.
Yeah, I would definitely do that. That's a great title. And we actually talked to you just a little over a year ago at BSides Las Vegas with Daniel Lowry. So that was great. And thanks for coming back on. But for those that maybe didn't see that interview and don't know what ThreatQuotient is all about, why don't you give us a little bit of background to start?
Yeah, so ThreatQuotient provides a threat-centric security operations platform, what a lot of people in the industry right now are calling a threat intelligence platform. We bring in a lot of the reporting that people have on all the things the bad guys are doing out there in the world, and we centralize it into one location for security teams to be able to push out to their infrastructure. So when you hear about the latest ransomware attacks or whatever it happens to be, we kind of centralize that information and make it useful for the teams that are there.
And so where's all this information coming from? Is that generated from your own labs?
No, so we actually don't have our own threat intelligence team. We rely on both commercial intelligence providers as well as open source and government feeds. So here in the United States, we have Department of Homeland Security puts out an intelligence feed of indicators, as well as there's a ton of open source feeds out there, and then quite a few commercial feed providers. So if you pay for feeds, we can bring all of those into the platform.
You know, so that's pretty interesting because I do get asked a lot because threat feeds are really starting about 2 years ago, I think, became quite the industry buzzword, and every organization out there subscribes to at least one, if not more than one. And people ask me a lot of times, Don, which one do you recommend? Which one do you think is the best? Which is a super hard question to answer as an IT professional. So in your scenario, if your company is aggregating these together, how does that work? Does that mean, like, let's say I'm pulling the Cisco Talos feed,
right.
I would then forward that to you guys and aggregate it, or you already have it. So by working with you guys, I would have access to that through you.
You just plug in your credentials into our platform, and then we automatically pull it down on your behalf.
Okay, so we wouldn't necessarily get access to feeds we didn't already subscribe to, I guess, except for the public open source ones that you're pulling in.
Correct. The open source feeds you can sign up for all day long. You're going to get spammed with a lot of information. It's a lot of commercial organizations are running into the same problems that government organizations have hit over the years, which is just data overload. So you can think of these feeds as almost like newspapers, where they're just or magazines that they're providing on the different threats that are going on out there. So now, imagine subscribing to 20 different magazines that you have to read every day, cover to cover, to try and understand it. And so that's why we've developed some technology to help you consume and then operationalize that information.
So how does that work? Like when you guys are dealing with, it's a massive volume of information, especially if you're aggregating all these open source or public ones, and then you throw in a couple of commercial feeds or however many you deal with there. How are you guys going about picking, which threat feed notifications are really important? Because I know different customers are going to view what's important differently, right?
Yeah.
So how does that all get kind of mixed together?
Yeah, and that's one of the big things we focus in on. I've been involved in the security business for almost 25 years now, and threat intelligence specifically for at least 15 or so years, and that is one of the key, I guess, use cases that we really focus in on, is the fact that threat intelligence, you need some context around it. You don't need to know, hey, these IP addresses are bad. That doesn't really tell you that much. You need to have some context around it. These IP addresses are bad, and this is why they're bad. They're used to steal credentials. They're used for ransomware. They're used for these other purposes. So giving you that little bit of context is really important. But then the relevance, how does this apply to my organization? There's a lot of threats out there. If they're attacking certain systems or processes, if you don't have those in your company or organization, they may not apply to you. And so you got to filter out, those relevant threats and that relevant information, as well as the little bit of context that you can get from all of those feeds. And so within our system, we have ways for you to be able to do scoring, where a user can go in and say, here are the things that are important to me. Here are the things I want to take a look at. And so I want to bring that all into the system, and I want that to rise up to the top. Let all the noise and all the other information sort of go off to the side and highlight to me what really really I can use and is important to me.
Well, first off, I think I need something like this for my email because I can't keep track of that. Right? I need you to tell me which ones are important. But actually, that I'm taking a little bit different perspective than Don. More of a developer centric. Let's say I'm starting a business. I don't really know much about threat feeds. I know, hey, I've heard some things. Is that something that you will help me as part of your platform? Like, hey, you were talking about context. Do you help your customers kind of determine what is best in their case, or give them any advice on that, or is that completely up to them?
No, I mean, we have consulting services, and that's part of my role at the company is just working with a lot of clients on sitting down and having a conversation with them. Not even charging, for professional services or anything else like that, but just talking to folks to let them know, hey, listen, here's what, is most important to your industry, to your business, with how you operate, because determining that right feed, like you had mentioned, a lot of customers or people will come up and ask you, what is the right feed for me to get? There are so many different factors that go into that. What industry are you? Are you in retail? Are you in energy? Are you in financial services? How big is your team? How mature is your organization? What kind of infrastructure do you have that you're leveraging for security? How do you operate? So there's a whole bunch of different things that go into it that we want to have conversations with customers about that will help determine what kind of feeds you need and then how you can use them within your environment.
So what I heard there was that John will personally, at no charge,
Yes.
customize and install the solution.
Well, where do I sign up? I tell you.
I will come in and be your executive assistant to go through all your email and make sure that you only get the ones that are important to you.
There we go.
Executive assistant of strategery.
Yeah,
that's important.
Yes.
That's an important.
I'm just
note
going to
to
need
make.
I'm just going to need your social security number and a bit of other information, and we're good to go.
Now I
This
might be
sounds
green,
like a
but
test.
I know that much. But that actually, kind of thinking of it as I know this is important. I know a little bit, kind of enough to be dangerous. You'll help me establish some context. But as far as the platform goes, like, what am I going to see? Like, am I just going to get an email notification that's going to get buried in my emails? Like, how does all of this come together to where I can stay on top of these?
Yeah, so a lot of it is just setting up. I'm a true believer in people, process, and technology altogether. So obviously our platform is a piece of the technology that you'll have in place, but you really have to have the right people with the right training and then the right processes in place. So what you need to determine is, what kind of security infrastructure do you have in place? What other security tools are you using? Do you have a security operations center that's using a SIM? Do you have an incident response team that's using orchestration or a case management system? And once we can, figure a lot of that out, then we can figure out, okay, our platform will display to you all that new information that's come into the system, but the real goal is to automate as much of that as possible. So you want to bring information into the system, have the system, be able to determine based upon your inputs, what's most important to you, and then push that out to your different tools so that people can leverage that and be able to conduct their jobs more efficiently.
Now, you mentioned pushing out to other tools. So, let's say that I've already invested heavily in like CA Unicenter or Splunk or a platform like that's serving as my SIEM or my primary interface for information.
Yep.
How do you interface with that? Are you writing custom integration plugins, or is this a standard interface?
So it really depends. We have an open API. But with a lot of those, so a lot of SIMs have apps. That you can go, the Splunk App Store and the QRadar App Store and those kinds of things. So we'll develop apps that people can load on to those platforms to be able to connect back to ours. But you can also, like I said, we had an open API, so you can just write some Python code and connect up our API to your API and make the systems talk to each other.
So what's the most creative use you've seen somebody make, actually implement your platform? Since it's an API, people in theory could use it for all sorts of things, right? What's an example of something off the wall you've seen?
Probably the most creative use is more of a threat actor database. So our platform is really designed more for network indicators to be able to bring it in and then deploy those out so you can block them at your perimeter if there's, command and control IP addresses and different things like that, different malware that you want to keep off of your system. But one of the more unique use cases I've seen is where they just use our system to just track, bad people that are out there. So, they'll track a John and a Joe and a Bob, and they'll have, all this information about different attacks that they've done over the years and almost a dossier kind of thing per person of, what tools do they use, who have they attacked, who's currently investigating them, what kind of federal law enforcement is after them. And they'll just use our platform as that threat actor database.
It was odd that you asked that question, Don, because in my mind, he said, you write a little bit of Python code, you interface with it. My immediate thought was like sirens and like lights going off and like a ticker panel out in our bullpen area that says, some things are going down. All our phones go off, like an Amber Alert or something. That way we could make sure to respond appropriately. I think maybe that's not the typical use case or maybe the most productive, but for some reason, that's where my mind went. And I was like, let's see it. Let's see if my vision is imagined. But I think your example was a lot more practical in that aspect.
Well, the world of intelligence is still at the point where, something has to happen and people, or something is about to happen. You're collecting information on that. So it's not as real time as a lot of people would like at this point. So if I set off alarms, a lot of times it would be, hey, something just happened a week ago. You should really pay attention to this.
Now, you mentioned some of the different data that comes in with one of these alerts, like, potentially who the actor is or the tools they use and so on. I know one of the challenges I run into is when I'm dealing with more than one threat feed, a lot of times there's duplicates. I should say a lot of times, like almost every time there's duplicates that are in there. So when you aggregate those results together, are you preferring one source over another, or are you merging the details to give a more complete view? What's the typical set of data that actually gets presented to the end user?
Yeah, so we're definitely merging all of that information together. There's two key processes that occur during the aggregation phase. The first is normalization, and then the second is deduplication. So normalization is just if you call something, IP-4, and somebody else calls it IP.4, and I call it IPv4, we're bringing that all into one central data model. So we're calling it all the same thing. And then we are, deduplicating and merging it so that if you provide a domain name that's bad and I'm providing that same domain name that's bad, I track it as one domain name, and then I list you as a source and I list me as a source along with whatever information we all have on it.
So I've done a little bit of this, pulling information from different feeds, not security feeds, threat feeds. But that sometimes is a difficult problem. Is there just a team that you have that goes, hey, someone's putting the IP.4 in there, we're going to change it, or does your platform just kind of automatically do that?
So yeah, unfortunately, right now we have to keep a very close monitor of all of our partner feeds to make sure that they haven't updated their API or renamed something or changed their data model in some way. The good news is most of the companies in the security tool field they communicate pretty well, so we get a heads up if somebody's thinking about changing their feed, so that we can be a little bit proactive. But there's always those times when our alarms kind of go off and they're like, all right, something's not working. A lot of customers are calling us up, and we have to go back and figure out what went wrong and what updated, and just make quick changes.
So I'm curious because you're in kind of a unique position. We get a lot of security professionals on the show, and we'll ask them things like, what product do they prefer, X, Y, Z, and a lot of times they don't necessarily want to pick one over the other if they're in some kind of consultant role or whatever. But in your position, you obviously deal with a ton of different commercial threat feeds, that are for pay, and granted, it's your customers that are providing their credentials to access that feed, but would you say, I'm trying to think of the way to politically word this. What I want to ask is, what do you think is probably the premier threat feed that's out there? Or if we want to be a little more graceful, we could say, which one do you see most people making use of, or the one that's the most reliable?
Well, yeah, this one I'm definitively biased on. I was a co-founder of iSight Partners, a threat intelligence provider that was bought out by FireEye in 2016. And so, by and far, I have to state them as my favorite. But they are, there's different levels of feeds that are out there. They're kind of in different categories, if you will. So, iSight Partners has a great feed. CrowdStrike is out there and is very popular. iSight and CrowdStrike are FireEye Intelligence now, and CrowdStrike are kind of the really big massively contextual feeds that are available out there. But there's a lot of great, specific feeds. Intel 471 has a great feed just around cybercrime and information that's out there. Alien Vault OTX, Cisco Talos has some great feeds. So but it comes back to the question you had brought up earlier, which is, what problem is the user trying to solve? And based upon that, we'll really govern which feeds will work best for them.
I know some of the feeds, I get a little frustrated sometimes where some of the feeds will tell you about a problem and give you a little bit of information, but it's not quite enough to act upon. And others go well beyond and say things like, not only here's the vulnerability, here's the CVE, here's a list of mitigation steps and so on. So when we work like with ThreatQuotient and it's aggregating all these different ones together, you're merging together information from multiple sources. I mean, at the end of the day, we should be getting a pretty thorough write-up of any vulnerability or exploit that's being identified, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And if you have the right feeds as well as enrichment sources, I mean, that's when you get into the domain tools and Cisco Umbrella and Virus Total and those kinds of things to where, if you have one of those feeds providing you some information, you want to go out to all your other sources and be able to say, all right, what do you guys know about this? And bring all that information in. But yeah, the goal is to centralize it so that when you're looking at our platform and you're looking at any piece of information, you're getting that full list of, all the information from all the different sources you have to get the best picture of what's going on.
So I'm digging through your website here, and I noticed on the events you're actually you're headed to AFCEA's TechNet Cyber 2019. We are as well. We will have a booth about 10 booths away from where you're at. It looks like, but that kind of made me curious. Like, what does your customer makeup look like? Because obviously that's a government DoD kind of show. Is that where your focus is, or is that just kind of one element in the bigger picture for you guys?
It's really one element in the bigger picture. I would say I'm actually fairly surprised. Most companies I've been involved with, you always kind of have that, real key sector that you're heavily involved in. We're really across sectors. I mean, we have, a lot of retail, a lot of financial services, a lot of oil and gas and energy companies that are out there, a lot of government business, international government business. So we really are spread fairly evenly across all the industries. If anything, I would probably say, one of the hottest industries moving into threat intelligence now is probably along the energy and oil and gas area.
So I noticed also, as I'm stalking down your LinkedIn profile, that you that you have a military background with the Air Force, and I'm curious. A lot of the people that watch this podcast are people that may be changing careers or getting started. So I'm curious how you feel that prepared you, or were you in a technical field while you were in the Air Force, and how did that kind of help you along your career path here?
Yeah, so the Air Force did a great job. I had a great honor when I was in the military of being able to be one of those offensive cyber warriors that they talk about a lot today. They didn't talk about it that much when I was in, but now they actually admit to it. So it gave me a lot of great capabilities and understanding of the threats in the adversary and how they operate. And then I was able to apply that to the defensive world in the commercial sector, once I got out. And so, yeah, it really did great. I'm a big fan of pushing for, people to go into the military and be able to get that training. It's free training. You get to serve your country, and I'm a big fan of it. My, two of my three boys that are getting to be of age are both looking at that same, kind of career path.
So speaking of that, I did a little bit of stalking on LinkedIn as well, and yeah, who would have thought
of him? Or
yeah. No, just a random person. I'm about to ask him a question about. I noticed that you list one of your backgrounds as Appalachian Trail hiker. How did that prepare you to continue to be in the security realm?
Every now and then you need to unplug.
I grew up right in the middle of the Appalachian Trail, and
oh, really?
Yeah, I was unplugged a lot, so I came down here and plugged in. So that's how.
Wait, wasn't there like a North Carolina governor who hiked the Appalachian Trail?
Yeah, that was called an alibi.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, you tried.
Yeah. So have you through hiked the trail? Just kind of a.
I have not through hiked the trail. Nope. I'm pretty much a weekend hiker, and I take it 2-3 days at a time with different sections, and I have most of the Northeast down through Virginia covered. I haven't hit any of the southern sections yet.
All right, I don't know what that means. Through hiked?
So beginning to end.
Like start, yeah.
Beginning
Yep,
to end.
beginning to
Yeah.
end.
So I take it it's really long?
Spent about two months on the trail, and you go from Georgia all the way up to Maine.
Yep. And if you've been through most of Virginia, well, I guess you saw probably my hometown. Congratulations.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And people do this on purpose?
Yeah.
All right.
Those are the people playing banjos at you as you walked by.
Yeah. There's probably some of that also.
There is something to be said for completely unplugging and not having your phone go off every 2 minutes with text messages.
Definitely. Hey, so if people want to find out more about the Appalachian Trail, about Threat Quotient, what's the best way to do that? Obviously, they can come see it at AFCEA, but if they're not going to that, what's the best way?
Yeah, so our webpage, threatq.com is probably the best way to follow up on what we're doing. You can email us, sales at ThreatQuotient or threatq.com, and that'll get through to our team, as well as follow us on Twitter at ThreatQuotient.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. And at this rate, I guess we'll talk to you in another 18 months or so, probably.
So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
I can be a regular guest whenever you guys need somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Well, yeah, we're always interested in hearing about the threat landscape out there. So that'll be something we can definitely look back at when the time comes around. But thank you so much for taking the time with us today, and thank all of you for joining us. But stay tuned. We've got more Technado coming up right after this. All right, welcome back, and thank you to John for taking the time with us again, and hopefully we will be able to take him up on that and talk to him again in the future more about threat feeds and threat assessments and all that kind of stuff. And speaking of which, we've come here to the end of the episode, and I'm looking down at my my bingo card, and it is pretty empty. I got Russia and I got 0 day. And the free square. I didn't actually mark
get
that.
the free square,
But I didn't do too well this week. We should have made like distro a word. Or
if we had gotten that extra interview, right? We were supposed to have an interview on, actionable skills if you were working with blockchain and cryptocurrency, but that one fell through. I mean, that would have been like half my card right there.
Man.
So. You guys are feverishly
I'm
checking
2 away now. After that,
still don't have bingo.
Yeah.
I need.
The episode's not over yet. That's all I'm.
All right.
Say
Well, we might need to retool our selected words for Buzzword
I think
Bingo.
we're all learning. But if you want to play along with Buzzword Bingo, as a reminder, head over to go.itpro.tv/buzzword-bingo. You can download the card, fill it out to your heart's content, and play along and see if you get bingo. Now, if you were playing along during the interviews there, I think you definitely got bingo, or you weren't listening. But we didn't want to play it during the interview because we don't want to look like we're making fun, but because we're good people. But definitely head over there and play along with us next week, and we'll try again. And now I know the things we're going to say a little bit more, and I'll do a better job looking at the news stories ahead of time and picking the words that I want to do there. But and we'll figure out the rules as well if I'm allowed to get you to say something
I
or not.
feel compelled. If you're listening to this podcast on the way to work or something, don't play this.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, maybe take a voice recording or something. No, mark that one down.
Yeah.
But don't have it like taped to your steering wheel going, there we
Hey
go.
Siri, mark off threat assessment. We'll have to come up with that app.
Yeah.
We'll work. Can you make that with Flutter?
Maybe.
All right, work on that. So, Justin, you can keep paying attention here as I tell the folks at home about a couple of things. First of all, we want to let you know about some webinars coming up from IT Pro TV over at itpro.tv/webinars. We just had one today, 10 tips for leading effective IT teams with Joe Peacock. That's going to be in the archive very soon. Then we've got one coming up, which is really exciting, getting a lot of people signing up for what does hacking look like. We're going to watch a live network attack from both sides with Don and Daniel Lowry. Daniel's going to try to break into Don's system. That's taking place on May 9th. It's Thursday at 2 Eastern Time. And even if you can't attend at the time of the webinar, go ahead and sign up for it because you'll get the recording. You get a link to the recording afterwards. I've got a lot of great recordings from past ones. Like I think the biggest one we ever had was Exploring the Dark Web, Part 2, setting up a hidden service. Those were really big ones. That you got that Dark Web?
Bingo.
Okay.
Don's already got it. You should have
Wait, you got
pen
bingo?
tests first.
What are your what are
I
your
actually
five?
I have bingo 2 ways if I get to count actionable, which technically I said.
You said it. You don't get to count.
So I have machine learning, threat feed, hacking, dark web, 0 day across my top.
Who said machine learning?
Did
I say
you did it?
I
yeah,
did.
To try to get me.
And then
Because I said I don't have machine learning, so
Yeah.
I said it too.
diagonally, I have machine learning, actionable, free space, automation, AI.
Yeah, you don't get actionable because you said it.
All right.
I
Well,
just
if I
said it.
lose that one, then I've only got bingo 1 way.
Yeah. All right.
Didn't we have one where Daniel showed his favorite tools for
Oh, like hacking into like red team, blue team stuff.
yeah, what's
Yeah.
the other word?
Blue team?
No, you already said blue team.
Red team.
No.
Is it where you have a researcher look at your systems to see if they can find
If they can-
vulnerabilities?
like a hack test.
Yeah, yeah.
It's close.
Yep.
Hack testing
Something
You're
like that.
killing me.
with a
You're killing me, Smalls.
penetration there.
There we go.
Oh, penetration testing.
Bingo.
All right,
Bingo.
bingo. I'm the only one. I'm the odd man out here. So I guess we don't need to retool anything then. Last thing we want to let you know about before we let you go, head over to go.itpro.tv/Technado. You can find out about 7-day free trial for IT Pro TV, as well as a coupon code for 30% off. And if you are interested in getting a subscription for your business, you can fill out a form there, request a demo of the Teams feature, and learn all about that great stuff. But thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you to both of our interviews, Matt and John. And thanks for playing along with us on Buzzword Bingo. Any closing thoughts, guys? Bingo.
There was a lot going on. Cognitively, for me, I was like stories, words. But it was fun. I
That
will
was a good
tell you
time.
that.
Yeah, we'll do it again for sure. All right, and we will do that next week. Same bat time, same bat place. So we'll see you on Technado next time. Thanks for watching.